research for this, what was the biggest surprise that you found?
Well, you mentioned something that I wanted to respond to.
Sure,
when
go
you
ahead.
said I was gonna spin off from when you said men. What did you say? Men are really called to be considerate and respectful and so on.
Loving.
And this might also be one of the most surprising things. So the first cross-cultural study of masculinity was done a few years ago, and by an anthropologist. And what he discovered was that no matter how different their views of masculinity were, all cultures share what he called the 3 Ps: the expectation that men will provide, protect, and procreate, build into the next generation. And he said it's universal, it's everywhere. Men are made in God's image. They do know what manhood is meant to be, that their unique strengths, biologically men are bigger, stronger, faster, and that their unique strengths are made not so that they can dominate others, but to provide, protect, and procreate. And I start the book, and that reminds me of another study that I started the book with. And as I mentioned, this was the most controversial book I've written. And when, I taught it in my class, and I had some reading groups to sort of rub off the rough edges. And when they would tell their friends about it, invariably, the first question would be, whose side is she on? With that tone, whose side is she on? Is she some angry feminist bashing men, or is she some, reactionary? And then the second question was always, and why is a woman writing a book on masculinity anyway?
Mm-hmm.
And so I found that I had to rewrite chapter 1 over and over to try to overcome that initial barrier. So many people just wanted to write it off immediately. And one of the things I found the most helpful was to cite another study. This was by a sociologist. He's fairly well known, so he speaks all around the world. And he's turned it into a study where he asked young men 2 questions, from Australia to Germany to Ecuador. He asked them 2 questions. And the first question is, what does it mean to be a good man? If you go to a funeral and they say he was a good man, what does that mean? And the men had no question, no problem answering that. They said, and I'll actually read it so you get their exact words: honor, duty, integrity, sacrifice, do the right thing, stand up for the little guy, be a provider, a protector, be responsible, be generous. And the sociologists would ask them, where'd you get that? And they'd say, well, it's just in the air we breathe. In the air we breathe, that book that you just interviewed, the author. And in a Western culture, they would often say it's part of our Judeo-Christian heritage. And then he would say, the sociologist would ask a follow-up question. And he would say, well, what does it mean if I say to you, man up, be a real man? And invariably the young man would say, no, that's completely different. That's not the same thing at all. And they would say, and again, I'm reading this, it means be tough, strong, never show weakness, win at all costs, suck it up, be competitive, get rich, get laid. So in other words, there are 2 competing scripts for masculinity. Not that every trait listed in the real man is bad, but if it's disconnected from a moral vision, then certainly things like, well, get rich, get laid. Those are the things we often identify as toxic. But it helped disarm people when I wrote my book, because then they didn't just say, whose side is she on? Like, you have to be all for men, be defensive on their behalf, or you have to be completely against them, talking about how toxic and harmful they are. No, you can say there are 2 scripts out there. Men are made in God's image, and they do know what the good man is universally. This guy's found it all around the world. But they also experience the cultural pressure to be the real man. And the main debate or discussion today is not necessarily between men and women. It's within men's own head between these 2 competing scripts. And what that means is we don't just charge men with being toxic. nobody responds well to
Right,
being called
right.
toxic. Nobody does. And so instead, it suggests a different strategy. The strategy is, how can we help affirm men in what they already know is the ideal of the good man?
Mhm.
Romans 2, we already know God's law is written in our hearts. So the strategy is, how can we affirm and support and encourage men to be the good man that they already know?